Well, it's 8 a.m. I'm I think we'll go ahead and start. I'm sure people will continue joining us, but I want to use everybody's time well. Want to welcome everybody to another MSV webinar. I'm Melina Davis. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer for the Medical Society of Virginia. We're thrilled to have you here, and I really have some terrific folks joining me this morning that I'd like to introduce you to. This morning, as part of the webinar, we'll be discussing innovation in healthcare and how physicians and PAs can bring all of their ideas to life. I'd like to start by welcoming several distinguished guests today. As you can see, their shining faces, Dan Neuwirth, Erin Powell, Paul Nolde, and Nicole Monk. We'll kick off today's presentation with Dan Neuwirth. Dan leads Realize Health, a company that provides advisory services to early stage innovative healthcare companies and healthcare provider organizations. Dan is recognized for starting and leading healthcare technology and services companies that make a difference in people's lives. He founded and led Envera Health, a leader in patient engagement services focused on improving experiences in healthcare. Dan also serves as director of a board for Claretto. I even asked him how to pronounce that before. Claretto, a data company he founded as a spinoff from Envera that connects life insurers with healthcare data. Prior to founding Envera, he launched and grew Med CPU, a clinical decision support company now owned by Merck and the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. He co-founded and led Agility Healthcare Solutions, a pioneer in process improvement and real-time location technology for hospitals, which was acquired by GE Healthcare. We understand that there will likely be questions throughout not only Dan's presentation, but even the panel discussion. We ask that you please use the Q&A function on the chat box. Just type away and I'll make sure to ask your question of the speaker and the panelists. And we also ask that you keep your questions to the topics addressed today, just to help the presenter stay on course and for the group. So with that, I just want to say we're lucky to have this group of folks, including Dan. And Dan, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Melina. I love the the direction to keep questions on topic. So I guess after watching the debate last night, I can just choose to answer any question that I want. So I could just disregard the question and answer whatever I feel like saying. But in any case, I appreciate everyone taking the time this morning to join the webinar and allow me to share some of my experiences. When I hear that background, you can kind of tell that I don't have a very linear journey. It sounds a lot more like a spaghetti bowl of stuff that I've done, but hopefully I can be interesting enough to keep everyone awake first thing this morning and not click the leave the meeting button. So obviously much easier to do than tiptoeing out of a room, but I guess it forces presenters to step their game up a little bit. So, I thought I would start by sharing just a few things that I'm often asked about. My journey with startups and innovation and helping companies and hopefully, like I said, they'll be interesting to you this morning. The first thing that I'll say is something that I often tell entrepreneurs that I work with is they can learn a lot more from what I haven't done right than the things that I did. And one of my favorite sayings is I've learned so much from my mistakes that I think I'm thinking of making a whole lot more. So for me, it's not just ironic, but actually true. I've mostly gotten smarter about how to start companies through the pain I've experienced and struggles, getting innovation created and implemented. And I'm still making mistakes all the time and learning all the time. So you're probably thinking, well, great, I just signed up to this webinar to hear about this guy's screw ups all the time. So in some ways, I guess, well, sort of, I guess that's true, but my journey is still continuing for sure. And what I can say now is that through these experiences, I've been able to create a playbook of sorts that playbook around just commercialization and how to start companies that's useful for others. So I thought I'd share some of that with you all this morning. While this playbook and some of the things I've learned don't apply just to healthcare, I thought I would focus just on healthcare innovation, given the audience here. So, with that, I'll start with a question that I'm often asked, which is, what motivates me to start all these companies? So I'm often asked, like, why do you do all these things, and how do you get involved in all these different types of startups? And the simple answer, to be honest, is that I'm otherwise completely unemployable. So unless I create something from nothing and do some of these things, I'm not sure what I would do every day. So that's a big guide for me. But really, there's a couple main things I would say that motivate me. One is I like the challenge of improving healthcare, even in a small way. And second, and probably more importantly, I feel that I can help people by driving innovation in healthcare. So that's what I find interesting, and is what keeps me continuing to look for interesting ideas that I think can be impactful to people, and what I continue to focus on at Realized Health. So what I recommend to anyone that's truly interested in devoting time or some of their energy into entrepreneurial things is to really spend time thinking about your motivation, and I think having absolute clarity, or at least a significant amount of clarity around your own why, if that makes sense, is so important. And mostly for you, so that you really have awareness around why you're vested in pursuing some of these things. But it's also ultimately important to other stakeholders that you get involved with. So whether it's partners or employees or investors, really understanding what's motivating you to focus on these things, I think is important, and ultimately will be a big part of being successful at it. So the second question, or kind of set of questions I'm often asked, is where do my business ideas come from? So it's often like, how do you come up with these wacky ideas to go pursue? Like, where do they come from? And or it's something I'm already working on, and I'll be asked, how did you come up with that? And I usually get asked those questions by people that want to be entrepreneurs, and they may have ideas that need to be fleshed out, or people just want to do more innovative things and don't know where to start. And I think there's less of a playbook around that, but in my experience, generally good ideas come from solving a specific pain point, or capture a specific opportunity, and usually they're things that you come across yourself. And the best way for me has been personal experience with a pain point, and I can share a few examples of that. I kind of have taken the view of, if something sucks for me, I'll ask others if it sucks for them too. And since I usually assume it's highly likely that it's just user error on my part that's creating the pain, so I test that out and see if others have the same problem that I do. And if I uncovering just some issues that people are facing is usually where I started some things. So just as an example, Invera Health is a company that operates in Richmond, Virginia here, which is a patient engagement company. The focus, you can think of it as kind of a call center on steroids for healthcare providers. And what they do is they're synchronizing call points for say a health system to get patients to navigating patients to the different parts of a health system that are most appropriate for them. And the genesis of that was dealing with just some of my own health issues, where I was working with a number of doctors, and virtually every engagement I had to share the same information, even though I was at physician office one day, I was at the specialist that I was referred to a week later. I was just a brand new person every time I engaged with that someone within that health system. So when I saw health systems that invest a lot of money in creating a brand and all these kind of things, they really didn't act like an integrated delivery system, at least in the experience that I was facing. And I contrasted that with I have USAA insurance, car insurance and some other insurance. So when I'd call USAA, if I was calling about an accident claim, they would answer the phone and say, "Hello, Mr. Neuwirth. What can I help you with?" And while I was talking to them about my claim, they said, "Oh, by the way, I see you haven't talked to one of our financial people in 6 months. Would you like me to set up a call for that?" And they could navigate me pretty easily to this kind of behemoth, financial organization pretty easily. And so my thinking was, boy, wouldn't that be awesome if when I engaged with my healthcare, which is far more important than my car insurance, if it was a similar type of experience. So that's an example of translating kind of a personal, painful experience that I had, and when I talked to others, they kind of experienced the same types of things. So that was an example of just using kind of personal experience to launch a company and create some innovation in the way things the care delivery system works. Claretto's another example. So Claretto, what they do is their customers are life insurance companies that use healthcare data to improve and simplify the underwriting process. So that came out of, again, my own experience of one in this entity in Vera Health that I was running. We had access to healthcare data in a certain way. And I was getting a life insurance policy, which is a god-awful process for anybody who's gone through that, right? So, the first thing you do, it's really easy to get a quote when you go online, and then after that, it's like a cascade into the sewer, basically. So after that, people call you, they ask a bunch of uncomfortable questions, and then that just gets you to the point of somebody's got to come to your house, or they send you somewhere to draw blood or do other kind of fluid testing. I had a phlebotomist came to my office and had to go back out to their car because the one kit she messed up in my arms, so I had to do the other arm. Right? So it just wasn't a great process. And then they had to go get the medical records after that. And so part of the thing at Claretto is, boy, what if you just turn that upside down and got some of these basic medical information to the life insurer up front? You could underwrite a whole bunch of policies just that way, and save applicants the headache that I was going through. And so again, an example of just a pain point that I was personally experienced, and just dug around a little bit to see why it had to be that way, or why it even was that way, and were others facing kind of the same challenges. The answer was yes. So that's just another example. I guess I'll finish on a third example, which is had a company called Agility Healthcare, which ultimately GE runs part of that. And so it's a company that it's kind of like an air traffic control system for a hospital, but mostly now focuses on tracking assets within a hospital system. So, we were one of the first companies to put in technology, that kind of an indoor GPS system that would track things as they moved around. And again, that experience came from a prior experience where I was in the business of selling pretty expensive solutions for tracking the cheapest things that a hospital would have. So Band-Aids, gauze, that kind of thing. So, very expensive inventory management systems to track really cheap things, but then recognize that the hospitals had nothing to track their most expensive stuff, being, their mobile medical equipment and IV pumps and thermometers and monitors and those kinds of things. So again, it was programming, well, why didn't something like that exist? And, how might we solve that problem? And it seemed to be a universal one that hospitals had. And that was the genesis of Agility. I can share more about any of those if you have questions about them. So that's kind of a bucket of questions. And so I, encourage people as they think about ideas and opportunities. It's usually what you're dealing with personally or what you're interfacing with where, some of the best ideas come from. Either to start a business or just to innovate and make changes in the way things are done. I would say the third kind of question, which is really a series of questions, is how do you know an idea will make a good business? And this is what I realize I spend a lot of time on. So I spend a lot of time working with people on good idea. Sometimes it's just a bad idea. So I'll admit that. So sometimes people, and you have to be fairly candid and say, well, at least it's an idea that I don't get. So, again, it may just be user error on my part of something I just don't understand. But I'll be, candid just about my view of the idea. But oftentimes, probably more often, it's a good idea, but may not be a business or certainly as a standalone type of thing. So the answer to that question varies, but I would say it boils down to a set of a few things. One is there a team or is it you personally? It comes back to something I said earlier, is what's your why? Like, why are you doing this? What's the motivation behind solving this problem? Because I think that's becomes the starting point of creating a business around the ideas. What's your kind of mission and purpose that you're going to build things off of? And it might be different than your personal why. So your personal why might be, I just want to make a bunch of money at this, which is okay. But there has to be kind of a more purposeful, mission around, what the company is going to be focused on solving. The next probably biggest question is really understanding who pays. And this is really just a huge issue in healthcare and healthcare ideas, because unlike a lot of industries in healthcare, who your user is, who gets the benefit of the solution, who ultimately pays for those things, who the decision makers are, those aren't the same things, same people, and they don't align. So it might be a physician that uses the solution, but it's really the patient that wins, but the payer needs to care because it needs to be efficient, effective. So it's fairly disjointed. So really addressing who's going to pay for this solution or pay for what you're ultimately put together becomes critical. And that I see isn't something that gets fleshed out really well often, particularly in healthcare for those reasons, right? So in a macro level, an idea might make perfect sense, but when you break it down into the various stakeholders and how you're going to get paid for it, it gets a little bit trickier. The next set of kind of things to address is really feasibility, both technical and practical. So, I talked about this agility company that put in, these indoor GPS systems in hospitals, and what it turned out, so we're just really naive going into it. And so what we used is a technology called radio frequency identification. Everybody's probably familiar with it, that, it's a similar technology when you walk out of a Lowe's and you got the portal and the thing beeps when you walk out, that's RFID, or your toll tag is RFID. And that's, that type of technology. But there's really two types. One type is those type of uses that I just mentioned, which is where you have these portal things that send energy to a tag, and that's what sends a message back and says, I'm this car, for example. There's another type which has like a battery powered device on it, and that battery powered device is what's broadcasting out to a network of devices that are, let's say, in the ceiling, for example. And so being naive about it, we just assumed those were the same things. Well, one's RFID, the other one's RFID. And I would say for this audience is equivalent of saying, well, an OBGYN touches a baby and a pediatric heart surgeon touches a baby. So, I can use a OBGYN to do pediatric hearts, right? It was about that similar, the technologies. So that's kind of an example of just technical feasibility. And frankly, we got lucky, in trying to figure out how to make it work. But it was really through, a lot of pain to create something technically that hadn't been created before. So the good news in that is it became a real competitive advantage for us because no one else had figured it out. We were pretty early in it. But it could have been a dead end pretty early because we hadn't really assessed some of the technical feasibility around it. So it turned out nobody in the really world was doing some of these things, but we just were too stupid or naive to know that at the time. Another kind of example that sort of bridges, technical and practical feasibility. MedCPU is a company that I was part of a founding team that was a clinical decision support solution that would sit on top of electronic medical records. So basically what that would do is, as a physician, a nurse, a PA would document, it would identify deviations in expected care and prompt the user that, there's some deviation. And, that just proved out to be, really hard to scale because, and technically, I won't go through all the components of it, but it ended up really hard just to get the data and use kind of what we call today artificial intelligence. But it was, now I could buy the same thing from Amazon literally for like 5 cents, but we had to create all that from scratch and then had to be able to provide decision support for, let's say we had things for stroke and we'd go in and try to sell it, and the customer would say, well, yeah, I'm not really interested in stroke. I want something to help us with managing sepsis, for example, right? So by the time you try to scale it to every use case, it was the practicality was pretty challenging there. And then I see things that are just good ideas, but completely impractical from a decision-making standpoint. So I'll see things in healthcare that are companies that just want to solve all things in healthcare. So you basically see a business plan or an idea that's effectively the person, just like Dan Neuwirth shows up one day with a business plan. And basically what my business plan calls for is I'm going to be Kaiser Permanente in 6 months or less, for $1 million, right? So most of you probably know Kaiser, they're $90 billion, been around for whatever, 80 years, right? But it's almost at that level of, hey, wouldn't it be great if we solved all things in healthcare all in one fell swoop through my company that's going to go do all these great things. So it's kind of just completely impractical from that perspective, or impractical from just the way decisions get made. So I was working with a group of physicians that had built a company around, they had a really nice overlay on top of any EMR, potentially an EMR, that just was a better interface to document some things, and it would tie it to coding better and automatically generate codes in a better way than the EMR, most EMRs do today. But when you talk to them and say, well, how are you actually going to get a customer to agree to put this interface on top of the EMR? You need the EMR's cooperation in doing that. And so there's sort of being naive about it. It's like, well, ours is so awesome that the EMRs will certainly see that it's as awesome as we do and just do that on behalf of physicians. So getting them to kind of get to reality and say, well, that's never going to happen. That doesn't happen with any software, and it's certainly not going to happen in this market space. So those are examples of really just, breaking it down to how feasible it is, both technically and practically. And another big area is again, just talking about, well, how do you know idea is a good business, is what's the size of the market. So I see examples of this with devices. Is a good one where there's an identification that this type of device, or if you did a couple tweaks to a device, it would really be, a better way to, an innovation, a better way for the device to work or whatever it might be. But there hasn't been an assessment of what's the size of the market. So if there's 100,000 of these procedures a year and the thing costs $10, even if you had 100% of the market, it's still only $1 million possible that you could generate from the thing. So particularly if you have to go through an FDA cycle and go to industrial design and have the thing made and all that kind of stuff, very quickly the opportunity shrinks. So it's not that it's not a good idea, it's just not a big enough idea to create a business around it. Just some other, quick things is, adoption is a big one. What's it take? How hard is it to get people to adopt the solution and the change management involved? And this is particularly true in clinical types of things where, most of you probably know, it takes a decade or more to go from idea and trial to making it a clinical standard of care in a lot of cases. So, there's a lot of things like that just the adoption curve is pretty steep to get people to change. And that doesn't make it a bad idea. It's just something that needs to be understood well, before kind of focusing on how does this idea get fleshed out. A couple other areas is just, alternatives and competition. So this one I see completely underestimated. This is true of all companies. So this is an early stage companies, is I find that there's a significant underestimation of what's going on today. So it might just be alternatives. There's a human being that does it, or it's paper, or whatever it might be. This is where like Google is your best friend, right? Because I'll find where I see like a plan and somebody says we're the only ones that do this. Like nobody's ever done this before. And I just do a quick Google search on the thing that they say they're doing. And there's like 50 companies doing it, right? There's like, well, what about all these 50 companies? And sometimes it comes back to, oh, well, we're the best and whatever, and theirs isn't as good as ours, but there is in sort of the pitch of the idea, it basically says we're the only ones that do it, right? And then you Google it very quickly, you find that, well, no, there's like 50 people doing that. So, one of my best ideas ever ended up being a really stupid idea because of that, which was, this was years ago. It's kind of an aside, but years ago, when 3D printers first came out, okay, it would be awesome if people just send their pictures and you can make like figurines of the person or bobbleheads of the person. So I thought this was like the home run of all time. Well, quick like Google search, and there's already like 50 companies that were doing exactly the same thing out there, right? So, but I do see that in, frankly, plans that I see, where somebody hasn't done that just basic market assessment of, what else is going on out there in the space that you're addressing. And there are things as how unique it is, how unique is it? So if you're more on the device side, intellectual property protection becomes critical because, as you know, a lot of devices are pretty easy to make and cheap to make. So unless there's some intellectual property patents and things that protect you, it's hard to turn the idea into business. Things that are like more software or process related and stuff, that's where that becomes less important. And then probably the last thing I would say is think about how you specifically are going to get this thing in the market. So it's not sufficient to say how someone could get it to market and how it could be this great thing if somebody were to do X, Y, and Z. It's the primary thing that's important is how are you going to do it, or your team's going to do it, or you're going to get somebody that's going to fill some need on a team to go do it. So that's a lot there, but it's just a bundle of things that as you're thinking about how do you take an idea to business? Those are just some of the key things to think about. So with that, I'll just share, I mentioned, Realize Health, and a question I get a lot from medical community in general is how do they just get more engaged in an entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I know we have a bunch of questions around that, in the panel, which we'll pivot to in a second. Is so one is if you don't have an idea yourself and just interested in getting more engaged there's a number of opportunities to work with early stage companies that may be looking for practitioners to pilot something or just to provide feedback on something. In some cases, they may be looking to have a formal to informal role of like a chief medical officer or a clinical specialist or something like that to round out their team. So those are, interesting ways to get involved. If you're thinking about just how you get access to things, that's a good way to do it. So, I'll stop there. If you want to bounce an idea off of me, or if you're glutton for punishment and want to hear about more of my mistakes that I've made, which we could spend a lot of time doing that, I would be happy to chat with anyone, at some later date or after the call. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Melina.
Thanks, Dan. As always, very insightful. I always learn something when we talk, and I get to listen to you. I will say somebody put in the Q&A box an idea that they had about burnout. Dr. Larry Monahan has an idea for working on the external factors that sort of put pressure on providers and the workplace. So I'm going to just turn it around a little. I do want to share the concept with our team and with some others, but I do wonder how could somebody take an idea and give it to somebody else versus work it themselves? How likely is it to be successful? What do you think about an idea from somebody where they're not invested or it's not a founder, and how that works?
Yeah, so if I understand the question, at first I thought you were going to say the question isn't, we're getting burned out, can you stop talking? So that's what I thought you were going to say.
No.
So if I understand, this a question is generally as a theme, is there solutions that can help physicians with the burnout problem? So there isn't maybe something specific to do that, but
somebody's asking about burnout and how to deal with that. I guess my question is, feel free to answer the burnout question, but I really want to know how successfully can somebody give an idea to somebody else, in your opinion, and then another founder take it? Do you have to be involved with your own idea to bring
No, I think you definitely can. I mean, I think you definitely can. I think it's the more feasible that is probably a function of how specific and fleshed out is the idea, right? So to the extent it's a really broad macro idea, so I think physician burnout, for example, is a big problem. It's a known problem. It's a macro issue, and there are companies that are looking for, hey, we're looking for solutions to solve this problem because we know it's a big problem, but they don't have the solution, right? They don't have the solution. So to the extent it's just defined at that level, it's harder. It's like, okay, well, yeah, we get, I get that macro thesis. To the extent is you start breaking that down and saying, well, the reason for my burnout, or burnout that I see is we're spending way too much time on documentation. I'm just making this up, right? Is there a way to streamline that? Okay, well, now I'm starting to look at a layer of solutions that's focused on documentation. If it gets even more specific of, it's documentation because we have to use these templates, and the templates are really consuming, and I got to check a bunch of boxes all the time. It takes forever. Like, why can't I just type something out? Okay, well, now I'm even a different layer. Okay, well, that's a different problem to solve, and you start to get more specific on solutions to that problem. So I think it's definitely doable. Kind of long answer, short question. Sort of how well that works is a function of how specific you can get on what the problem is.
Perfect. I want to invite you to take part in this next section as well. We're going to move on to have a panel discussion, and I'd like to now introduce the rest of our speakers. Thank you for sitting there so quietly, everybody. We have a very distinguished group here. Erin Powell is the executive director at Lighthouse Labs, and she spent her career creating connection, capital, and customers that allow founders in technology and beyond to build their dreams and see their ideas come to life. She's no stranger to the high growth startup scene. Erin's career has ranged from launching her own successful e commerce brand to growing some of the region's largest software as a service companies. Erin began her career helping colleges and universities drive enrollment at Royal and Company, a very successful Richmond company, an educational marketing and technology firm that was based here, is still here. Um, there, Erin spent a decade building sales and growth channels at the fast growing HR technology firm Snagajob. And her passion for startups then propelled her to create her own e commerce juice brand, Ginger Juice. I'm sure many of you have visited Ginger Juice, that quickly grew into a brick and mortar organization. We also have Nicole Monk, who serves as director of VCU Ventures at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, and also serves on the HIC board. Prior to her role at VCU, she served 2 years as vice president of marketing and business development for a US based private equity firm, Virginia Life Science Investments. In this role, she evaluated a diverse range of technologies for potential investment and played an active role inside portfolio companies to ensure maximization of shareholder value. Carrie has also served as, I'm sorry, Nicole has also served as vice president of Virginia Biosciences Commercialization Center, a firm focused on developing commercialization strategies for later stage medical device companies. During her 5 years with the VBCC, Nicole worked with multiple later stage medical device companies, leading or monitoring the development and implementation of their commercialization strategies. She received a BS in biochem from the State University of New York at Fredonia and her MBA from VCU. I'd also like to introduce you to Paul Nolde, who I've known forever, it feels like, and was instrumental actually in my startup. Paul has, for over a decade, been experienced in banking, finance, venture capital, and other business development and management roles. As the fund manager and managing director of Riverflow Growth Fund, a seed stage fund base in Richmond, Paul is responsible for all aspects of fund management and investment related processes. So, this is our money man today. This includes business development, deal flow cultivation, and due diligence, syndicate investor cultivation, investor relations, and portfolio management, including board service. Prior to this, he served as a director at NRV, New Richmond Ventures, an early stage venture capital firm also based in Richmond. In this role, he co led their overall business development strategies and their discernment process around new investment opportunities, as well as supporting several portfolio companies via board service. He's an active participant in and advocate for Virginia's entrepreneurial ecosystem, serving on the boards of several local and regional organizations, including Activation Council, CAV Angels, the Launch Place Seed Fund, and SCORE. Additionally, Paul sits on various boards at VCU and the University of Virginia, where he also serves as an adjunct professor of impact investment in its Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. So, with that, I'd like to just welcome Erin, Paul, and Nicole, as well as Dan. This is a great opportunity to ask our presenters any questions that you have about innovation. I'll be monitoring the Q&A function on the chat box, and I can relay those to the panelists. And then I also, of course, have a long list of questions that I'm happy to throw their way. But I want to just give you all a chance first to generate some that we could throw their way. Let's see, I see something. I'm a second year medical student at VCU. My question is about team development. I have a medical device concept, but I'm struggling to find a team to help me take it to the next stage, especially with my limited time due to the heavy course load and knowledge of manufacturing/engineering. Do any of the panelists have a suggestion of how I go about doing this? If I'm not overstepping boundaries in regard to the scope of the webinar, I also wanted to ask if anyone in the call who has the experience would be interested in listening to the concept. Thank you so much. That's from, I'm not sure if I'll pronounce it correctly, but Barath, is that right? Barath Petabatala. Batala, I think that's right. Excuse me. Anybody want to take a shot?
I'll take a crack at it. Yeah, I think that one of the groups that I'm involved with, the Health Innovation Consortium, really tries to support innovation from concept to kind of the clinical setting. So we love to hear concepts. And one of the things that we do a lot is try to help build teams. It's one of the hardest things to do, and I think Dan would agree with me. It's hard to find really experienced entrepreneurs that understand the healthcare world because it is so complex. But where we usually start is early teams. You know, that's the people that will have the hustle to kind of understand, you know, what are we trying to do here? Do that customer discovery so they can really understand the problem and make sure they're, you know, solving it in an effective way, or even that the problem is significant enough to solve. Those are kind of the initial hurdles you have to get through to assess whatever it is, whatever concept that you have, is to say, am I solving a real problem? And is it a big enough problem that anybody cares to solve it? And yeah, that's kind of the structure of what we try to help people do.
Yeah, I get that question several times, and thanks for having us on, by the way, Melina. This is a great opportunity. So good morning, everyone. But I do get that question quite a bit in the form of, you know, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder or co-founders because, you know, it's no secret that investors prefer to invest in teams versus just kind of a solo entrepreneur, and nothing wrong with that. But there's just, you know, the old adage of two heads are better than one. It's not an answer. It's not a question I have an answer to, candidly. It's I could say, well, you know, one way is to be more active in the ecosystem, kind of in your spare time. But as you said in the question, you don't really have that spare time. You know, some of it is just trying to expand your network. Again, to the extent that you can do that over LinkedIn, you know, by attending these types of webinars. You never know when you pose this question, you know, what happens tomorrow or the next day. You know, I could come across somebody who's saying, gosh, you know, I'd really like to work on a problem in you know, in this area, but I'm looking for somebody who's got the idea, kind of what Dan was talking about earlier. So it's sometimes it just it happens organically. Other times you have to find it, but I know that's not an easy one. So your question is valid, and it's very good. Unfortunately, it's just I wish it was an easier answer.
Yeah, I will say when I had the concept for my startup, I knew I didn't have the technology background to do it, and I just started asking people if they knew anybody with these fields, and eventually people just started introducing me to different people, and I got to meet them and found my founders as well as our technology partners along the way. So it's interesting, to Paul's point, the more you put it out there, I think the more that can come your way. But I'm happy to sit down with you and help connect you with folks as well. And you can teach me how to say your name properly. My apologies. All right. He said, thank you so much. With that, I don't see any other questions yet from the panelists, so I'm going to throw a few you all's way. So if I have an idea and I'm not sure how to begin, I think we've covered that to a degree, but let me know if you'd add anything to that. But specifically, what would your advice to physicians and PAs be who want to step into the innovation and startup world, given that they are in the healthcare space and on large shift blocks, et cetera? But any advice for people getting started?
I'll take a stab at that and then toss it to my probably more qualified colleagues. You know, from my vantage point, I would say, and this gets right to the heart of what Dan was speaking about earlier, I think thinking through what you really want to do professionally. So, if it's bringing your idea to market and commercializing it, but you really still are passionate about, your practice, I would say, obviously trying to find a team that can take that, commercialize it, but that doesn't mean that you have to give it up. You could stay on as the chief medical officer. You could stay on as, in some type of role that keeps you bound to the company, but allows you to do it in concert with your regular quote unquote day job. Investors like to back full-time entrepreneurs. So that's kind of the genesis of my answer or my comments. So really thinking hard about what's going to drive you each day, each morning to wake up and go to work. And sometimes, as I like to say, it's more of an internal interrogation than anything else versus an internal kind of question. Because as especially Dan and Erin know, starting your own company, and Melina, when you start your own company, you're often, on an island by yourself. There is some very dramatic, days where you're down, then you're up, then you're down, you're up. Not to say that that isn't the case in the medical community, dealing with patients and some rough situations, but it is exhausting. And so just, I think, again, having that internal interrogation with yourself as to how you want to bring your product to market. So I'll leave it at that.
Helpful. Thank you, Paul. Hey, Erin, why don't you tell us about, feel free to add to that answer, by the way, but why don't you also tell us about Lighthouse Labs and HIC?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll just add a little bit to Paul's comments. I think practically there's an incredible startup community here in Richmond. And so even just getting plugged into that community can give you a lot of energy and excitement. And I think that we've even managed to do that over Zoom with some of the events that are going on around town. And, would just really encourage you to step into that to get kind of a renewed energy for sure, because the startup community does bring that to the table. So at Lighthouse, we're looking for companies that want to go through a pretty intense process to commercialize their ideas. And so we look for companies that have an MVP, they've already talked to customers. To Dan's point, that process never really stops, but the companies that are successful in the Lighthouse programs, have an MVP, they've talked with customers, they have a team pulled together, and they really want to take their company from point A to point B in a really accelerated fashion. And so we do that by pairing these founders with mentors that are highly experienced in the space and providing really customized programming to help meet the objectives of these founders that are coming into our programs. And so we do that twice a year. We also invest financial capital into the companies as well. So it's an incredible opportunity on a lot of different fronts. One, if you're a founder and you've started a company, to come and get some true expertise and help. I think Paul mentioned that starting a business can be lonely. You can feel like you're on an island, but with the support of groups like Lighthouse and others in the ecosystem, you really don't have that sense of loneliness. You have a community that can help you along your journey. And then, two, you can get involved as a mentor. So, all three of the folks on this call are mentors with Lighthouse. Melina has referred some really excellent mentors into the Lighthouse programming as well. And our mentorship is really flexible, so you can be involved as much or as little anytime during the day. We always have events going on and always have founders who want to talk with people that have different levels of expertise. So we're really kind of a hub for innovation here in the Richmond market and really throughout the region. We service companies throughout the state and outside of the state as well. So. And we do have a number of healthcare companies that we service, and we're really excited to be partnering with VCU Health and the Health Innovation Consortium currently. So happy to be here, and thanks for allowing me to do the introduction, Melina.
Sure. How many physicians or PAs are currently involved with Lighthouse Labs? And particularly, why don't you talk about this class, this cohort you've got right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're blessed to have 129 mentors that work with Lighthouse. There's currently 8 companies that we're supporting. And, unfortunately, we can't support everybody for 2 reasons. One, we want to offer a highly curated experience for the founders. And 2, we do invest financial capital into the companies. And if you're interested, certainly mark your calendar for November the 12th. That's our community demo day. You can find our invitation on Eventbrite and go and register for that. You can hear directly from these companies that are working to solve really big problems in the healthcare space, like medical credentialing. There's been several mentions on the webinar this morning about paperwork and how cumbersome that is, and getting docs to be able to contribute more quickly, to companies that are working on medical devices like spring-loaded technology for knee braces and spinal surgery solutions as well. So definitely an opportunity to come and hear from these companies coming up soon on November 12th.
So how can people get more involved in the startup and innovation circles that are not just in Richmond, but all over the state? What are the best ways to start? I know, Paul, you sort of hit on that just a little bit, but talk about how people can get in the door, especially if they're not always around during business hours.
I'd say one place to start is going to Activation Capital's website. Activation, I can't remember the domain off the top of my head, but I'm sure somebody will put it into the comments or the chat. In any case, if you go to Activation Capital, this is an organization that supports the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem in Richmond and really beyond. There you go. Thanks, Nikki. And the reason why I say go there is they have kind of a master calendar of ecosystem events. Of course, pre-COVID, it was in person. Now, it's probably mostly webinars and Zooms, but nonetheless, that gives you an idea of what resources are out there in the ecosystem to tap into. But also, again, kind of the where people are gathering. Oh yes, also thanks, Erin. Another website, Make an RVA. That's kind of a more ecosystem driven website versus Activation Capital specific. But and as she notes, it's put on by Activation Capital. So I'd say start there. But just to get a feel for some other areas, Startup Virginia, if you go to their website, Startup Virginia is kind of a cool front door to the high growth ecosystem in terms of companies that are starting out and that are headquartered in what used to be in the brick and mortar building, still there, but obviously things are a little different. You have obviously Virginia Bio at the Biotech Park. So one thing that Richmond is blessed with is a myriad of and a multitude of what I'd say front doors to the ecosystem and great assets across the landscape. So, whether it is life sciences, biotech, or digital, health or health tech, and a lot of others, but for the purposes of this audience and call, I'd say we have quite a bit of ways to plug in, and you can do so again from the comfort of your home. And I know everybody on this call has very limited time, so I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything to add to that.
I'll add something. I think that clinicians and PAs and nurses all have something that's really valuable to this ecosystem, and that's they're the end users. They're the people that we can really the innovator side and the entrepreneur side can talk to say, you know, again, that discovery question of am I solving a problem? Like, what is your problem? So we can be effective about solving it. And that insight is really difficult to have and to get. Those connections within health systems is sometimes, you know, a challenge. So if you are interested, that mentorship role is super valuable for people with that kind of background. So I think you could go to any venue that offers any kind of program. And we're really lucky to have Lighthouse Labs in Richmond. This is a nationally ranked program. So it's a great place to start. But reaching out to somebody who runs programs will get you connected really quick, and you'll get to know other mentors, entrepreneurs in the space. If you have an idea, that's a great way to start engaging, because you'll meet people that are looking. You know, that's what you need to do, make the match with the people that are looking for an idea. So that'll be my 2 cents.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, I'll just say Lighthouse Labs is a statewide organization. And you even have some entrepreneurs from outside the state that are involved in your programs. And there are other startup labs and incubators all over the community, all over the state. And anybody in other communities that wants something much more local, just reach out and we'll help you connect to them. One of the things I just want to say, we've got 3 minutes left. And at the beginning, when the panelists were getting organized, Paul and I were talking about the beginning of our journey in entrepreneurship and innovation, and how we just didn't know anything. We didn't know what we didn't know. And we certainly didn't know what a good idea was. We didn't know what the pathways were. We didn't know who to go to. And I'll just ask really quickly of all the panelists, how can somebody go from not knowing to being part of it and feel comfortable not knowing? I mean, tell me about that awkward stage and how you just took a step to get on the journey.
Yeah, I know we just have a couple minutes, so I'll answer it real quickly. You know, I don't think it's some super big mystery. You know, and you know, frankly, I shared some of my experiences of being super naive going into things, and sometimes naive is good. It pays off. You don't know what you don't know, so you don't start thinking about all the ways it can't work. But you know, I think some of the the panel has shared a bunch of resources that I think are all great ones to plug in. To plug into. You know, there's good startup communities across the state to get engaged in. So it's just probing some of those, I think, is the best way. There, you know, the good news is that there's a lot of people available that are willing to help, that can fill in the gaps. You know, so you don't need to be shy about raising your hand and saying, hey, I've got this great opportunity, or I'm interested in this, but just don't have all the answers yet. There's a lot of guides available.
Yeah, and I would just chime in and say that Richmond is a really approachable startup community. So, you know, unlike maybe some of the startup scenes on the West Coast that, you know, might be a little less approachable, I think just by nature, folks here are willing to give back. They're naturally curious. And so just continuing to be involved in some of these groups and ask questions and network, you know, is certainly the best way to get tapped in. You know, most universities have innovation programs or can connect you through innovation as well. So would definitely encourage you to chat with your alma mater, different alumni groups, and see what directions they can point you in as well. You know, universities are always naturally curious and innovative, so they're definitely a great front door. But don't be scared. You know, like I said, this community is really friendly, really forgiving. We're all always asking questions. you know, even of one another. So it's definitely an approachable group.
I appreciate that, Erin. That's a great note, because I do think it can be intimidating when you have an idea, but you don't know how to start, and you wonder if you could even do it because you're working full time or you're so busy. But we all start out with just an idea and just a little bit of time, and then it's a journey. I want to just thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much. Paul, Nicole, Dan, Erin, you guys are amazing humans, and I'm so glad that you're here helping others. And I want to let everybody know that we will have this recording out on our site. So feel free to share with others, watch it again. We'll also add all of the links that were provided here, so that you and others can access them as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address is mdavis@msv.org. And I'm happy to just point you to anybody if you have questions or want connection offline. All right, with that, thank you all. You guys are
Thanks, Melina.
amazing. Thank you for everybody's
Thanks
time.
for having us, Melina.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well done.
Bye-bye.
Bye.